red and glowing.
Aye, well, I've heard enough about it now, lad.
Ready when you are.
Shattered shop windows, shapeshifters, shipwrecks, and the chameleon factor, sometimes called lycanthropy. All on this 30th, I'll explain later. The Doctor Who podcast that, in the early days of oil, would have said there's nothing better than a really big candle. With your hosts John West,
Jim Hall,
and Matt Needer. Tonight, strange glowing objects fall from the sky, and soon the Third Doctor has to stop an alien menace that can take on a human appearance in 1970's Spearhead from space.
A strange glowing object falls from the sky, and soon the 10th Doctor has to stop an alien menace that can take on a human appearance in 2007's Human Nature.
And a strange glowing object falls from the sky, and soon the Fourth Doctor has to stop an alien menace that can take on a human appearance in 1977's The Horror of Fang Rock.
Happy New Year!
Happy New Year!
Whoa!
Did you all have a good Christmas?
Yeah.
Did?
It was very nice, thank you.
Good.
I feel like I am coming down with the classic post-Christmas cold now, so apologies to listeners if I sound even more nasal than I usually do.
Do you know what I'll prescribe for that? 50 cc's
I
of
think I can see
Doctor
where this
Who
is
reviewing.
Going. Great.
Stat.
Does it come in suppository form?
Absolutely.
Thank God this is a podcast, not a vlog.
Anyway, yeah, Happy New Year to everyone out there. Hope you did have a good Christmas.
Yeah.
And over Christmas, you'll have seen the old Doctor depart, a new one spiralling off into infinity.
Mm-hmm.
We're all on tenterhooks waiting till September, I believe, when we're going to get a new Doctor and a whole new production team. So
only 10 episodes,
though. Come on, Levine, just calm down then.
Ouch.
But
Wow.
what
Wow.
more appropriate a story to kick off 2018 in that case than Spearhead from Space, which sees Doctor Who go through probably its biggest change up to this point, arguably even bigger than Patrick Troughton changing from William Hartnell.
The whole thing's rebooted.
So, to give you a little background on it, I'm sure you're familiar with it already, but Spearhead from Space sees the newly regenerated Third Doctor land on Earth during a meteor storm and face off against the Nestines and its living plastic foot soldiers, the Autons, for the first time. Mm-hmm. It sees Doctor Who in colour for the first time.
In colour!
And the beginning of the unit era with Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Gatiss, as we must now call him,
Yep.
enlisting the Doctor as unit scientific advisor, along with the new series regular Liz Shaw.
Mm-hmm.
Played by
Caroline John.
Caroline John. And
Caroline John.
Would it be fair to say regarded as a bit of a Stone Cold classic? A phrase that we use quite a lot.
I think it has that
It
reputation.
is held in high regard, but I'm going to ask. John's on his phone looking at what Caroline John did next. So I'm going to ask Matt. I'm assuming you've seen this before.
I have seen this quite a few times before.
All right, so you're more than
I'm very
casually
familiar with it. Yes, as you'll notice, I'm going without notes for this one because I know the story so well.
And trousers, I must say.
Again, good job. It's an audio podcast only.
What did you make of it, and does it still hold? Has it changed? Your opinion of it changed at all over time?
My opinion of it has changed over time. Just cards on the table. This is, I think, the best Doctor Who story ever.
Right.
Now, that comes with the asterisk that there's still a few that I haven't seen, and I look forward to maybe being able to revise that opinion further down the line. But I think this is stunning. I first watched it, I think it was one of the earlier ones I watched. So I first watched it in the mid-90s, probably only a couple of years after I started getting into the series, and I loved it then. And I've seen it so many times I almost considered not bothering to rewatch it for this one because I know it so well, but I just couldn't resist putting it on again.
Unlike your trousers.
Unlike the aforementioned trousers. Yeah, lovely.
So much more of this in the next 90 minutes.
Next 12 months. Yeah.
I think this is absolutely magnificent. I think this doesn't put a foot wrong. It's as near to flawless as I think I can summarise Doctor Who serial. I think one of the reasons why it's aged so well is because it's one of the few Doctor Who classic series Doctor Who stories where I think you have to make absolutely no concession to any production shortcomings. It looks and sounds and feels really high end because it was all shot on location, all shot on film. which has also meant that it's the only classic series Doctor Who that they've been able to remaster in HD. Watching this time round, it's the umpteenth time I've seen it, but the first time I've watched it on Blu-ray in full HD, and it just looks incredible. Like, the colours pop, it looks super high-end, and in a way sort of stands apart. I mean, obviously, like a huge sea change from the Doctor Who story that preceded it, but also very different, much as I adore the Pertwee era, very different to the ones that come afterwards. I think we'll get into, I can list the many hundreds and thousands of ways I think this is perfect shortly, but top line is, this is incredible.
John?
No, I'm waiting for your take on it.
Really?
Yeah.
I would probably echo quite a lot of what Matt said. We've praised the Pertwee era pretty much continuously from the sort of very early days of the podcast, and it's still kind of weird to then go back and watch the first one and see how well formed it was from the beginning. I know there'll be
also a very
arguments.
different beast as well. It's different, I think, to what follows.
Well, yeah, I mean, about a year ago we did Terror of the Autons, which again reinvents it a bit more with
it's almost like
the
a soft relaunch.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, just to echo what you said, coming off the back of the Troughton era, it is bizarre to think that the preceding story, which is, I mean, I really like the War Games, but it's a very different thing to this. And I think the most recent story to this that we've done is the Crotons. It just feels like a whole different show,
Yeah.
And it is, like I said in the introduction, for me, this is maybe a bigger change than even Hartnell turning into Troughton, because I'm not saying that was insignificant, but I think the changes that happened to the show there would have happened over the course of several stories with Troughton's personality and performance imposing themselves on it. But I imagine the actual stories, the way they were being told, were pretty similar to what would have happened if Hartnell had stayed on. Whereas this does feel like, and all the indication is that Doctor Who just ground to a halt, or there was a very deliberate, let's take this to pieces and start
Ground
again
up rewrite,
from scratch. And it's, it is unfortunate, but there are a lot of people who just ignore the 60s and the black and white era altogether and start here. But in many ways,
if it did start here,
I mean,
you'd get on board. It's like,
absolutely. And it's Doctor Who going from being an uncanny show that's set in space and about exploration down to a sort of Quatermass. We're going to say slightly Avengers, which is a comparison that gets wheeled out a lot. Probably more James Bond, because I think the Avengers is a much more whimsical show, or the show that we think of when we think of the Avengers.
I think it feels of a piece with a lot of those ITC dramas at the time, which I think is helpful because they were all shot on film and all shot on location and, had a lot of the same sort of supporting cast and things. So, feels of that world.
Pertwee's great from the get-go. Regeneration stories tend to be some of my least favourites precisely because you want it to get on with the new era and you've got the Doctor unconscious for a long time. Just as a quick throw forward, I think Robot with Tom Baker, he does a little bit of wonky stuff to begin with, and then he's the Doctor pretty much halfway through the first episode. Castrovalva, let's not get started on it. Or the Twin Dilemma, whereas this seems to take the perfect amount of time to start with who is this guy, and you're seeing things through the eyes of the Brigadier and Liz Shaw. You're also involved in the mystery of what's crashed in the woods. It does seem, I'm reluctant to say a masterclass in Doctor Who, but it really does feel like Robert Holmes, who's on his third script for the series. And
that's astonishing.
Seems to have got everything bang on the money here.
John?
Like Matt, I'd actually seen this several times before and went into it expecting to like it because I had liked it so many times before, and it's brilliant. I just loved it. To echo everything you've said, I think what's interesting, perhaps looking at it in the past, I'd been struck by all of the differences that Matt mentioned, so the fact that it's filmed on film, which was as a result, I believe, of industrial action at the BBC studios. So they were forced to sort of go on location and film it on film, which has had a marvellous result, and it gives us this sort of
very lush looking, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you mentioned the ITC shows, Jim, or Matt, I can't remember. But you mentioned the ITC shows, there's the sort of spy genre shows, and I think in terms of style, that's the big difference. And I think most of the difference is in that sort of how it is filmed rather than the format, which does seem to arrive pretty fully formed. So in a sense, my view has changed because I'd have viewed it as a sort of blind alley, whereas actually I think now I'm seeing more of the stuff that has been baked in from the beginning and then goes throughout the era. So... the setting up of unit, the laboratory, the raggedy old puffin, in this case the poacher, but it could be a tramp or who stumbles on, I'm thinking of something like
Pig Bin Josh in the Claws of Axel.
Yeah, exactly.
He's the ultimate.
Yeah.
And any number of locals in future serials. And the base, or the sort of laboratory area where, in this case, it's wholly with bad guys in it. But, Yeah, all of that stuff seems to, the getting embroiled in bureaucracy or crossed wires between the government and the army and unit.
That's a strand of it that I found, to me, it kind of really flashes forward to the something like the X-Files, actually, the way they set up UNIT here. I mean, UNIT becomes a bit of a sort of cosy military. It's almost like a sort of home guard operation further down the Pertwee era. Whereas here, it's the scene early doors of the Brigadier trying to persuade Liz Shaw that there's such things as aliens and they've attempted invasions before. Felt super X-Files, but then also that idea that's bubbling in the background, and I think, to be honest, probably wouldn't have been productive to carry that on across the entire series. But there's this sort of arm's length tension going on between the regular army and with UNIT, and the Brigadier is in charge of this sort of slightly eccentric offshoot of it, but he needs to pay lip service to people like General Scobie. There's a point where he just says, like, I need to impress this guy, presumably because of some sort of funding or some sort of wrangling going on there.
Though to be fair, Scobie actually is perfectly accommodating. It's only the plastic Scobie that
absolutely
really is a problem.
No, but it's interesting that you don't really hear much talk later on about that, about where UNIT stands in relation to the rest of the army, and that's a sort of fascinating little thread here that they've got their own thing going on.
Yeah, that's right. But nonetheless, the general setup is sort of there from the off. Again, though, those stylistic differences, the sort of base under the arches. When Liz Shaw is first driven in, there's some really sexy spy music. I've got to say, Dudley Simpson seems to... It's not the usual and don't get me wrong, I love the usual Dudley Simpson parping, but this seems to be really consciously, like,
you realise his versatility.
You really do, because clearly the brief here has been more spy show, more prisoner, more champions or whatever, and he really delivers. I think it's a fabulous score. The creepy, relatively spare stuff in the very famous scene with the Autons jumping out of the window. I mean, everything about this is fabulous. Pertwee arrives, of course, fully formed. I don't know, I've only seen a few Liz Shaw stories.
Well, there are only 4 of them.
Yeah, okay.
We watched the Silurians for this, haven't we?
And I've seen Inferno, so there's probably one I haven't
just
seen.
Got Ambassadors of Death to...
I don't think in the ones I've seen, maybe Ambassadors is a bit different, but in Inferno, although admittedly it's a parallel universe, and in Silurians, I don't remember her working as effectively as in this very first serial. Where I think she's really good.
Well, it's like that first episode of The X-Files where you've got Scully overcoming her scepticism here. I mean, that's the barrier that she's crossing.
Even though there's that scepticism, there's also a warmth, and when they're when she's first introduced to the Doctor, there's a sort of mutual chuckling and a rapport.
She clearly likes him more than she likes the Brigadier, even though her sceptical hackles are raised.
Yeah, exactly. And they quickly knuckle down and get to work, and the final scene is probably a little bit shonky with the tentacle and so on, but it's actually Liz that saves the day by
mending the machine,
reconfiguring the machine. I've got to say as well, just coming off the back of the Christmas special we've just seen with the First Doctor reintroduced in the guise of David Bradley, where the First Doctor's rank misogyny was supposed rank misogyny was put up on screen. A subject I dare say we'll debate some other time. Gotta say, that sort of had my antenna particularly tuned to whether there was any misogyny in this era. Or in this serial that we're looking at now. In Spearhead from Space, it's very clear that they're aiming deliberately for a progressive read on that relationship, to the extent that only the old duffer General Scobie makes an off-colour remark, and it's to illustrate that he's an old duffer who says, "Oh, good to see you got a pretty face around here." And the Brigadier only replies, "She's not just a pretty face," which you could technically think, because as you say, he's trying to still maintain a level of, but he still nonetheless slightly reproaches General Scobie for making that remark. In every other respect, the Brigadier does nothing but, although he gently chides her for her scepticism, he treats her with nothing but respect. The Doctor treats her with nothing but respect. That's very interesting that they have clearly tried to create a character that is genuinely
a partnership,
and not just, "Oh yes, would you mind going and make some tea?" Which kind of, I guess Jo, who comes in a bit later, she has a great character development, as we've discussed, but she starts off in this perhaps slightly less of a progressive space.
Yes.
She's a ditz.
Yeah.
And Liz really isn't. And I think Caroline John plays this terrifically. The scepticism into the sort of gentle humour of the relationship with the Doctor.
But this is the extraordinary thing that I think it's, and I'm not wanting to use this as a stick to beat other Doctor Who with. It's a Doctor Who serial that you don't have to make any apologies or concessions for in 2018, sort of culturally or politically or visually. It's great. I mean, the other thing that really struck me about it this time around is the elegance with which with which it launches all of both the immediate story and the running threads of the era. Its masterstroke, I think, is in not doing probably what the new series would do, and opening with, the shot of the TARDIS spiralling towards Earth, but in fact setting up the story of the mysterious meteorites and the poacher, during which that's when the Doctor crash lands.
Yeah.
So you've got another story developing whilst the Doctor's out cold from the narrative, and then there's a sort of bit of tension about what point the Doctor is going to insert himself
in addition
into
to
the
which,
narrative.
Completely incidentally, the unit officers who are monitoring the meteorites, the leading officer is a woman.
Yes.
And it's completely coincidental.
Yeah, not mentioned.
No.
Yeah.
So again, it is annoying when you see later representations of later incarnations of Doctor Who chiding the previous show for its
lack of progressive.
Yeah, because actually, maybe the Troughton era are fine, but
it's a different conversation. But
it is,
people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Yeah, indeed.
It's also striking, I think, is like this really does, as Jim says, this sort of sets up a whole new template. It's a ground-up rewrite, and if you weren't watching, if you hadn't watched the previous 6 years of Doctor Who, you could start here and be immediately up to speed, I think, with everything you needed to know. But it's interesting that I think the DNA of this story is found in so many others when a relaunch has been needed. So, I mean, the TV movie, the Paul McGann film, is basically lifts entire chunks of this, including the...
Tragically not the opening, though.
Yeah.
It was the end of my seventh life.
Well, yeah, not that. But, the crashing to Earth in the middle of some sort of crisis, the hospital setting...
The hospital setup, definitely.
The hospital setup, definitely. Rose obviously uses the Autons, but also, I think, does not make the mistake of the TV movie by setting up a bit of her character before the Doctor appears into her world.
With Rose, it's seeing the Doctor and the whole weird world that he's brought in through her eyes, in much the same way the Brigadier and Liz Shaw are here. So
Even the 11th Hour is sort of not doing this explicitly, but I think is sort of very much riding that vibe of like the sort of the countryside mysterious goings on kind of thing, of which the Doctor sort of having to heal in that kind of environment. So in some ways, this, more so than An Unearthly Child, kind of really does set up, this is how you relaunch Doctor Who. And it sounds like, I don't know if by the time this goes out whether any more will be known about the plot of the 2018 series, but it very much looks like we're going for some sort of, the 13th Doctor separated from the TARDIS and stranded on Earth kind of storyline, which again is totally channeling what we've got here. This sets such a good template for just how you do Doctor Who.
Well, look at the parallels with the 11th Hour. I mean, this is often compared, I think, to the 11th Hour, or at least the 11th Hour is often compared to Spearhead from Space, and the parallels are there right down to getting the costume from the hospital. It's
which is a scene I really love. It's something about how we usually see.
It's a bit racy when he has his shower, isn't it? Bloody hell, he's in good. He's very trim, isn't he?
Yes,
his tattoo.
Yeah, I just love that whole scene when Pertwee's trying on the hats and things. I think with the flat cap, he's just looking disgusted with himself after a little bit.
Yeah.
And again, when he's trying to steal the guy's car and doing a 3-point turn with this quite sinister music playing on the soundtrack. I just
Pertwee's comic touch is just pitch perfect here.
Oh, he's really funny.
Because he is a comic actor, was going into this primarily a comic actor. And this was, I think, his first series, or one of his first, certainly one of his first leading dramatic role. But his ability to channel that comic expertise is really fantastic. So I think in lesser hands, indeed in many of the other Doctors, even some of the ones who are very good actors, the stuff about the race of their eyebrows.
Imagine Sylvester McCoy doing that,
or even Capaldi, who's famed for his eyebrows. You just can't imagine anybody else being able to carry that, and he carries it, with a bit of a chuckle, so he knows it's quite funny, and he just inhabits it perfectly. He really is a class act in the role. Coming back to the whole sort of spy thing, I think it's really interesting because I think we look at this so much through the prism of what does this do for Doctor Who as a template, and how does it echo through different eras of the show. I think it's often a bit easy to lose sight of what this story is doing. And I thought that it was fascinating. I mean, just the spy sort of thriller style of it And I guess we should have a discussion at some point about, Derek Sherwin and what was going on there in production terms, which perhaps Jim probably knows more about than I would. But just in terms of the story, you've got that spy thing going on. There's
very hard-nosed as a story, isn't it?
Well, who's the guy who owns the factory? I've forgotten his name.
Channing.
Yeah,
there's Hibbert.
No, Hibbert.
Yes.
Who owns the factory. So Hibbert is being manipulated by Channing, who's one of the Nestines. And there's the kind of Manchurian Candidate sort of...
It's the brainwashing kind of.
Yeah, manipulation. And we're, of course, still in the Cold War.
It's a fabulously creepy performance, isn't it? Hugh Burden doing Channing.
Yeah,
it's
fabulous.
It's so good. Because he's just got an amazing face. It's like, because he looks like an Auton without much makeup.
I want to get to the makeup, actually, because but in a second. But that sort of manipulation, Manchurian Candidate, the idea of sleeper cells or a fifth column... we're not quite in the most outrageous era of Reds Under the Bed, but we are in the Cold War, and these are live concerns when there's big industrial action taking place, even at the BBC, but certainly in the rest of the UK. Strikes are referenced by General Scobie.
We talk about the factory being thrown over to automation as well.
To get by. Speaking of which, and again back to the filming, the doll factory sequence at the beginning of episode 2
with Fleetwood Mac playing on the radio.
It's disgusting.
Which again, that
beautifully
just shows you we're in such a different world to the Troughton era at that point, aren't we? Of just like this sort of verite kind of look at a doll factory with Fleetwood Mac playing in the background.
And it is, the thing is, it's completely natural. Like, it's completely just almost like documentary footage, but it's so scary the way it's cut. I mean, major props to Derek Martinus, the director. What a fabulous job. Everything is pacey. The pacing of this, I mean, obviously Robert Holmes gets a lot of the credit. The script editor was Terence Dix. Everyone's bringing their A game, but the pacing of it, even something that should be completely absurd and not work, like the Doctor escaping on a wheelchair, has this kind of daring do thrill to it, which I think
that's pretty good.
Fabulous.
I mean, I think that may have even been the first scene. It looks really good though, and it is a good cliffhanger when he's been in bed doing nothing. It's quite a sort of pacey cliffhanger that he gets bustled out by these couple of sinister figures, and then shot in the woods. It's
that's a terrific cliffhanger.
But it's all those other bits of sort of perhaps less political, but all the kind of social detail, like the hospital porter who's on the make and sells the story.
The Welsh fellow who's also in Dad's Army.
Yes,
I can't remember his name.
Tafflin Thomas, I think.
Yeah.
And then that's and that's where it's things.
You pay for stories, don't you?
But then the scene where the Brigadier is being bustled through the hospital
with the press.
It's just the West Wing kind of.
Yeah, and that's where you really get the benefit of it all being shot single camera handheld. It's really claustrophobic, and it feels alive in the way a lot of those things from 70s Doctor
training exercise.
I don't know.
It's great that.
I don't know if you saw.
And he
this,
says, "How did that lot get here?" And the other was it. Corporal Munro, or whatever his name is, says they just arrived like swallows in the spring.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw this when it was repeated, and there was a little Doctor Who repeat season
99. Yeah, I did see it.
But yeah, as great as the Silurians is, and we reviewed that a while back, it can't help but feel like a bit of a jolt when you go from this looking like an ITC thing to like the Silurians, which is a much more studio-bound videotape kind of production.
Yeah. Well, they cut an amazing trailer for this in 1999, which I think is on the DVD.
Oh yeah,
and they really cut it as like a sort of it's really speed ramped over like a sort of rock and roll track, but kind of real. And it just felt like a real exciting blast of sort of late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah,
it does feel very late 60s in a way, and that I think we associate
with getting the Cool Britannia vibe off it a bit too late.
Yeah, possibly a bit.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of parallels with those shows like The Saint, The Prisoner, etc. I mean, I was really struck in episode 2 when they finally get Unit finally gets hold of one of the orbs, but because it is out in the open, they're able to track it, and the Auton manages to get hold of it. The Unit guy crashes and dies, and you see blood on the windscreen. But you wouldn't see that. I mean, even when they were complaining about the worst aspects of Doctor Who violence in the 80s, and I'd be the first to say it gets a bit unnecessarily grim, you wouldn't have seen blood on a windscreen. This is pretty out there.
The implied violence of what happens to Sam Seeley, the poacher, and his wife, and when they get through, and
that's horrific. What happens to the wife
when she walks into the living room and just sees the Auton ransacking through the sideboard? It's like it's really horrible.
And it is one of those things where it is probably worse that you don't see it.
Yes,
because it's just so grim. and just the natty boiler suits the Autons wear.
Well, the Autons are just great.
They're
full stop.
fabulous.
They look brilliant. They look so much better here than they do in Terror of the Autons.
I was going to bring us on to that. Yeah, I mean, do you think? Well, you've just answered it. You think they're better here than there because Terror of the Autons goes that step further in terms of, well, if you can animate plastic, you can do all this other stuff with it, and it's the daffodils and it's
which
the
is a
troll
fun
doll
development
and
of the idea.
Stuff.
You know, that's...
But yeah, I think arguably they do look more sinister, these blank face things.
It's
and
the blank smiling
idea
faces,
of just
but also
inanimate things coming to life.
Wearing the fashions of the day after they come out of the windows as well. Like they're all wearing those really stylish kind of velvet dressing gowns with
one
the
looks,
price
one looks a lot like Barry Norman as well, doesn't he?
The also just the choreography of them, the way they move. We're going to review Human Nature, Family of Blood later.
Spoilers.
And I am going to just say, I think that the choreography of the muscle, in this case the Autons, here is far better than the choreography of the Scarecrows in Family of Blood.
They're going to have a dance off or something. You got served.
But it's just that there's genuinely a sense of otherness rather than a sense of a choreographer saying, and you're a scarecrow and you're moving and you're sort of moving, and it's very it's a bit too mannered.
But the actors in them are great because they're just sort of nicely characterised in a way. There's the one that is running through the forest and then loses the signal and then sort of looks around in quite a bewildered way. Is great. But then also the one after they've the Doctor and Liz have built their Auton busting machine and they try it on the first one, and he genuinely looks like his head's exploding or something, and it's just in the movements that the actor gives. And then obviously just seeing them rolling downstairs and falling over and jumping over things.
But the amount of special effects work they had to do for this as well, like when the famous shot of them, and when they start massacring the bus queue. Oh my god! Which is horrid. But the number of those explosive packs with the gas, the coloured gas coming out of them, they must have had to use to show people being shot.
What I will say, my favourite explosion in this is just that tiny little scene that made me laugh so much when the Doctor opens the gate. And he says, step aside, would you please?
Yeah,
and there's just a little thing, and then just the gate pops open, and then he holds his arm out to wave them through. It's so lovely. It's like it's real essence de Pertwee.
Oh, and the wonderful arseholery, the lovely bit of sound work they do for when he tries to escape in the TARDIS.
Oh,
and there's all but a vibroslap.
Boinging springs and everything. Yeah.
It's that's very funny.
It's just, there's literally, it doesn't put a foot wrong. There isn't an ounce of fat on it. There's no bit where I wasn't bored. Even the nesting snake tentacle thing at the end gets a bit of a bum rap on this. But even then, it looks so much better than even something like the Mara snake, however many years later. It's like...
Yeah, which is the big payoff to that story. And indeed the one in Terror of the Autons, which is just this chroma key splat.
It feels... obviously there's a sense to which Pertwee is dragging this thing around his own neck and gurning quite a bit. And maybe he goes a little too far in trying to oversell that. But do you know what? It's still like a big sort of semi-articulate rubber tentacle that's kind of thrashing around in a thing with smoke pouring out of it. And I think it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I think so too. Obviously, that's the prosthetic work, the makeup work on this, which we already referenced, but the slightly shininess of the Auton Nestine copies.
Yes, so Scobie especially.
Brilliant
it just looks a bit sweaty.
Cliffhanger of episode 3 when Scobie opens the door to see another Scobie. It's just fantastic. But the fact that the copy is just slightly plasticky.
Yeah.
The makeup work is very subtle and it's really, really effective.
In fairness, it was when they did the fake Mickey and Rose as well, though. That was, you could barely tell the difference.
Can we give a little shout out to the actor playing General Scobie here?
Hamilton Dice,
yes. Who, according to his Wikipedia, was known for playing starchy military types, which, of course, he
tended to play a lot of priests.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In fact, he's in a production of The Pied Piper in 1970 opposite Donovan as the Pied Piper.
Wow.
I think with Donald Pleasance in it as well.
Hamilton Dice is just you could only be an actor with a name like that.
I did want to sort of get to grips with who actually came up with the format, because obviously the producer here is Derek Sherwin, who immediately departs, right?
Yeah, the next story is the first one of the Barry Letts, Terrence Dicks era.
And Terrence Dicks is on board.
Yeah.
So he's already the script editor. I think was he already script editor at the end of the
I think because he co-wrote the War Games with Malcolm Hulke, so I think he would have,
or at least,
So it gets a bit wonky towards the end of the Troughton era. Is Peter Bryant on board as well?
No, this is just credited to Derek Sherwin, isn't it?
So just walk us through. I'm sure, like many of our avid fan listeners,
listeners,
would perhaps be aware of this territory. But for anyone who isn't, and I wasn't, so what's the deal here?
I think Doctor Who's ratings were plummeting during the Troughton era.
Not surprising.
There was, I think, whether it was this time or at the end of the first Pertwee season, there was talk of getting rid of it altogether. I think it may have been the end of this. And then after they tried a lot of other series, including remaking Quatermass and stuff, they elected to just stick with Doctor Who. Apologies if I've got this wrong, because I'm not sure if that's the end of the Troughton or the end of the first Pertwee season. But yeah, it would have been Derek Sherwin who came up with this, and in the previous season he'd already, coming off the back of Web of Fear, had decided to come up with the Brigadier for Invasion, which we'll be covering quite soon. And I think because Doctor Who was an expensive show to do, going to different planets and time, historical eras.
Different sets and costumes needed every week. Yeah,
just bring it right back down and just stick it on Earth. Same thing Battlestar Galactica did in 1980, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, they came up with that, and then Barry Letts and Terence Dicks ran with it.
It's bloody brilliant.
But why did he leave so abruptly? Did he just get another job?
Sherwin.
I think that is it. Yeah, he was just offered something else that he wanted to go and do.
And they never looked at this and thought, wow, 16mm film does really lift this. We could do the whole...
I think that was a necessity because of this scene shifter strike, and they were going to do it all on location, did it on film. And I think apparently Derek Sherwin did have an eye to maybe selling it to the American market.
Right.
But then, they didn't carry on with that for whatever reason.
Okay.
I mean, it would have been great, but again, I'm not sure if that would have increased the expense that much more.
It would have been much more expensive just because the amount you could shoot in a single day decreases. So you'd either have to have a shorter season or a more expensive one. And
don't forget, with this, Doctor Who's already going down from something like 42 episodes a year to 26 with this. So they'd have lost even more after that. So
in so many ways, it's a relaunch and a template for so much Doctor Who to come. But also at the same time, I think it does stand alone in that regard. It's a weird sort of hinterland between 60s and 70s Doctor Who. It kind of exists on its own in a way. I think it's absolutely flawless.
The dummies are made from a special composition of plaster and emulsion, reinforced by Hessian canvas and chemicals. And in case you're thinking of making one yourself, you need at least 15 pounds of plaster. By the way, as a matter of interest, the vital statistics of the perfect female dummy are 36, 22, 36. Actually, most window dummies are made these days without heads, because changing hairstyles, for example, date a model so much. In any case, fashion changes limit the life of a model to 3 years. Such things as shoulder and bust lines can be identified with certain fashion trends by discerning women.
So, we fast forward 37 years.
That's correct.
Yeah.
To 26th of May and the 2nd of June 2007 for the 10th Doctor two-parter.
Over 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. 10,
it's going to come up a lot with the 10
years
era.
ago. Yeah, so Human Nature and The Family of Blood, which I think...
You sound like you're reading someone's disappointing homework.
Well, I suppose that's fitting given the school location. This...
John stood with his back to us, staring out the window as he said
with a dunce's cap on.
Just staring at a rugby match.
I think it's overwhelmingly the case that this has a decent... It certainly has a decent reputation. For anyone who just wants a little refresher, the 10th Doctor is desperate to avoid detection by alien hunters and therefore transforms himself into a daydreaming human schoolmaster, John Smith, who, of course...
Ironically, is what Pertwee ends.
Yes.
His final words, Spearhead from Space.
Hiding out...
If we planned, we could have come up with a link there.
If we had, but that would be unlike us, wouldn't it? Our character. So he's hiding out on Earth in 1913 with the spectre of the First World War hanging over them. Martha is also undercover to keep an eye on her amnesiac friend. Romance then blossoms between Smith and school matron Joan Redfern, played by Jessica Hines. But soon, the aforementioned alien hunters, the Family of Blood, possess human bodies and demand that Smith resumes his Time Lord form so that they can eat his regeneration energy, basically.
Something like that.
Which makes it sound like that's what the story's about, when it's not really about any of those things. It's about growing up, it's about war, it's about love, it's about the choices you can make in life, the many splintered paths that it's possible for a person to take, the different personality types that can reside within one person. It's quite a deeply psychological two-parter. I think this deserves its reputation as a very fine story in Doctor Who's history, and I'll just pass the baton. So, Jim, how do you go to this one?
This does have a really good reputation, and so did the New Adventures novel by Paul Cornell again that it's based on, which is probably why it was picked up. And
he of course wrote the teleplay for this.
Yeah, and even if you haven't read the New Adventures,
although with quite a big rewrite from Russell T Davies.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
Even if you hadn't read the New Adventures, the reputation of this was pretty big. You'd probably know what the setup was, and it is an irresistible idea, isn't it? It's Paul Cornell doesn't take any. He's not trying to show away from the fact there's a certain amount of Superman 2 in there with him choosing to become human. I've got to say,
Superman 2 meets Goodbye Mr. Chips, basically.
Yeah, or Merchant
which
Library,
I think is
with a Doctor Who twist.
Well, with Goodbye Mr. Chips, it is also set in a private school.
Yeah.
Running into the First World War.
Goodbye, Mr. Chips, the basis for Human Nature and Breaking Bad. It's like a quote, It has that great reputation, and I've got to say this probably announced what a cold fish I am, but the thing for me is I imagine, even though you did list a lot of other elements that the script brings up, I'm a bit baffled why it has that fantastic reputation, and I'm pretty sure it will be about that central conceit of the Doctor becomes human, and he becomes human, gets a taste of it, has this whirlwind and doomed romance. And I imagine people are very much hooked on that idea. And the thing for me I have read the book, but a long time ago, and I'm not really going to comment on that because it's lost in my memory a bit. But watching the TV version, that idea just doesn't really appeal to me. And watching it, because I don't really want to see the Doctor as a human being particularly. The reason I like the show and the character is more to do with the fact that he's not caught up in that. Doesn't mean I'm not interested in that, but I'd watch a different kind of film or show for that. So when I'm watching this, I'm probably more on the side of Martha. I feel kind of like Short Round in Temple of Doom watching this. I'm very much not wanting this sort of main character to go down this route of falling in love and whatever. It doesn't really mean much to me.
But isn't Russell T Davies precisely saying that everyone's accusing me of making the Doctor too human, too much of a romantic character, too this, too that. And actually, by doing this, you see how alien the Doctor really is, how removed he really is. This is the counterpoint. This is the way of saying this would be making the Doctor human and giving him those human faults. He isn't that. He's a hero. He is emotionally unavailable. He is distant. He can't form those kind of relationships. And so it tells us something about the Doctor that he's put in that scenario.
I'm not sure because
I am, and that's just right.
That's okay then. Well, we'll move on to Matt then in that case. We will go into this more as we discuss it, but I'm not that interested in watching Doctor Who becoming a Doctor Who fan. I'll leave it at that and we'll come back to it a bit later.
Sorry, what?
He becomes a Doctor Who fan, essentially, doesn't he? He turns into a human being, but very specifically, he's the daydreamer who's lost in his journal of impossible things or whatever it is. He doesn't become... He's a very specific type of human, I think.
I think it's very reductive to look at that as a reflection on fandom. I think it's just a function of the plot. But, Matt...
Well, I love this. I think... So I did read the novel, I think a couple of years after it came out. And then I think I reread it a couple of years later. And I really loved the book. And I was very excited to see it was being adapted for television. I suppose one of the things that is quite interesting about seeing it almost out of context now, and I haven't watched it since it went out, although I did love it at the time, and I think it is really good. There's no particular reason why I didn't rewatch it. Is that it mines a lot of those same central concerns that we've seen Davis and then perhaps latter day Moffat kind of run into the ground a bit. That idea of the Doctor being pulled up on his almost his own recklessness and the danger that he puts other people in. I think the idea of this is, I sort of slightly split the difference with both of you in that I don't particularly think it's about wouldn't it be interesting if the Doctor became human, and I don't think it's particularly about that any sort of. Well, no, I think it reflects on what being human is and all of these kind of qualities, but I think it is it's fulfilling that classic Russell T Davies role of examining who the Doctor is and almost sort of pulling him up on his own foibles. By the end, he's back to being the Doctor, but it's been mercilessly laid out what those compromises involved are.
To the extent that by the end of it you like John Smith much better than you like the Doctor. The Doctor comes across... The Doctor at the end of this is much like the Doctor that you see in the specials.
Yes, totally. But in some ways the Cornell book is the sort of urtext of all of this, in that the reason it's broadly the same. It's a pretty faithful adaptation, but the whole setup is different. Whereas, because in the book, Bernice, his companion in the novels, her boyfriend died at the end of the previous book, and she's in mourning, and the Doctor turns himself into a human because he can't understand on any kind of empathetic level what her grief is and why she's so upset. So he then, and I always thought that was quite, there was quite an interesting idea that actually it's not, whereas the 10th Doctor is lying low in order to protect himself and Martha in the book, it's a kind of gross act of selfishness on the Doctor's part because he's so emotionally out of touch that then he exposes everyone to this appalling risk. You know, it's that very sort of 7th Doctor, you know, is he a good guy, is he a bad guy kind of thing. But in many ways that's pulling up the Doctor on his moral compromises, which is what Davis and then Moffat do all the time. There's been a lot of modern Doctor Who, which is all about trying to create some sort of jeopardy in terms of, you know, when will the Doctor be the Doctor? And I would include in that the most recent episode we've seen, Twice Upon a Time, which obviously we'll review it in the fullness of time, but briefly I thought was something of a mixed bag, largely because of its total lack of jeopardy. We know that the first Doctor is going to regenerate into the second Doctor, and we know that Jodie Whittaker's around the corner. So basing an entire story around will the Doctor decide to regenerate is a total non-starter. This, I think, could fall down the same hole if it wasn't for David Tennant, whose performance as John Smith in this, I think, is absolutely magnificent in making him a kind of reflection of the Doctor, but also a completely distinct character. As John pointed out, ends up much more sympathetic than the 10th Doctor. And I think it's a real tour de force performance from him that I think gets a lot of this over the line. I think it's a really good script as well. I think there's a lot of richness of the period. It was interesting actually, like when because the book, I seem to remember, really goes to town with the pre-First World War setting, to the point where in the book there's a scene that I sort of remember quite vividly where a historian from 1913 who Bernice is hanging around with gets hold of her notebook and reads forward about everything that's going to happen to the rest of human history throughout the 20th century and becomes incredibly depressed by this. My memory of seeing this when it went out 10 years ago was that the book had sort of pared back a lot of that detail. Watching it now, no, it's all still there. You know, the really chilling line about how the schoolboys are going to have to go out and face the slaughter in the trenches, and are they going to thank the man who taught them it was glorious, to the headmaster. It's like, you know, it's unstinting in terms of reflecting a lot of the tension and the moral tension and even some of the prejudices of the period. So I think it's an incredibly rich script, but for me it's all about David Tennant in this one.
I mean, his performance is good because it's distinct from the Doctor. I just don't find John Smith that likeable, though, I've got to say. He seems a relatable guy in the first one, and I think a problem for me is in the second part when it's resolving itself. He does seem to just get bullied into sacrifice it.
Yeah,
he gets bullied into give it up. Rather, I'd have preferred to maybe have seen something where maybe Martha was telling him he has to sacrifice himself and become the Doctor, essentially commit suicide. And Joan was more like, because she's on the side of trying to get him to turn back as well, whereas I think there might have been a bit more of a conflict if she was like, no, don't give yourself up, you know.
Yeah, but the thing is that although there is this accusation against and I think it's right, obviously, that schoolboys shouldn't be taught the art of war, and the futility of the trench warfare and the senselessness of it is writ large, and especially when you look at the faces of young boys who will be, there's the line where they're cleaning the floors and one of them makes a horrific racist remark, and I think is it Jenny, the friend of Martha's, says, "Oh God, to think that they'll be running the country one day," and she's, well, given where we are, it's 1913, maybe not. Obviously, that stuff is important. But actually, it doesn't go the whole way in saying that this war, that the people in it, or that the war itself was entirely wrong, or that, there are times when you need to draw a line in the sand. They have to face off against the alien threat. They have to do their duty. There's a lot in this about duty. It would have sat against John Smith and Joan to... He has a duty to stop these people from destroying humanity. Duty is a huge part of this. And it's actually a sort of... There's a lot of respect in the script for duty. and for people's sense of duty. Right to the, I mean, obviously the final scene is them in an act of remembrance, where, you know, wearing poppies, even the Doctor wearing a poppy. You know, you can have a debate about the symbolism of the poppy and whether it is a purely commemorative symbol or whether it is in some way glorifying war. But I think, you know, you can certainly have a read on it that it reflects, it is a commemorative symbol, that it is an act of remembrance and that shows some respect for the duty and sacrifice that individuals have made. It is therefore in keeping that John Smith, though hating it, though fighting it, though upset by it, that he and Joan would ultimately come to the conclusion that the duty there was incumbent on them to take this move and lose the life they could have had.
Yeah, and that's what she says, you know, that John Smith is a better man than the Doctor because the Doctor...
Yes.
Because John Smith sacrificed himself, whereas the Doctor sort of laid low.
Yeah.
And like I say, I mean, that sits within that new series thing of beating the Doctor up on his sort of moral shortcomings, or, you know, his privilege, in a sense, that how he's able to live
Well, it's
his
very
life.
chilling, that thing, isn't it? Is it right that if you hadn't done this, none of the people here would have died?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the sort of crushing blow.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole final sequence of where he, you know, jumping forward, but where he dispatches the family one by one in sort of quite horrific, punitive ways.
Yeah.
And then he goes to say goodbye to Joan, and she says, you know, none of this would have happened if you hadn't turned up. And, you know, it's pretty brutal.
Yeah, and then Martha says, well, maybe I could go and have a word with Joan. He says, no, it's time to go. It's time to go. He's very emotionally detached. Yes, that stuff where he punishes them by giving them the eternal life they'd always wanted, but sticking them in one particular place is pretty chilling. Yeah. And it is one of the very few calls back to the thing in the Christmas Invasion of no second chances. I'm that kind of a man. That's
one of the few times we've actually seen it. Yeah,
it's actually pretty nasty. I could go on and on about how much I love this. I think we've talked about Tennant's performance. We haven't talked about Jessica Hines. I think the chemistry between them is, for me, it's utterly evident, and you truly believe in the romance because they just sizzle. I think.
Well, she's great. I mean, I love Jessica Hines, but she's so sweet in this, in a way that
they
is
are.
Just, it's. And the flash forward, I mean, that's the thing.
The whole first scene with the books, where, you know, it's so English, isn't it? You know, well, if you hold that and that, I appear to be carrying your books. Oh yes, so you are. It's just glorious.
But the bit where it goes a bit Last Temptation of Christ, where John Smith sort of fast forwards through what his life might be like if he settled down with Joan, and you know, that's
bleak
so,
as fuck, isn't it?
But it's so beautifully done, where it's just like, I think it's a measure of how well everyone's working here. Was that I do sort of agree with Jim to the extent that there's a it's not a MacGuffin, but there's a central proposition at the heart of this, which is a bit dodgy, I think, or it's a bit contrived, and I think in the hands of someone else, I think could really be quite hacky. But it's just all of these little beats like this that for me really get it over the line, that really do actually sell me on, you know, so, like I said, Twice Upon a Time, I don't buy either Doctor having an existential crisis about whether or not to regenerate. Here I do buy John Smith's existential crisis about whether or not to become the Doctor again, even though we inevitably know that there's another episode next week and there's episodes for, you know, for the rest of the month, basically. They're going to have to hit the reset switch. But, you know, it's a measure of how well I think the script is working and the performances are working, that I do buy that as a crisis as opposed to a bit of faux jeopardy.
You're not keen on the scarecrows, though?
Purely, no, I think they look great. And I think they're a lovely idea. And when the first one moves, it's really amazing. I just think the sort of choreography of how they move is a bit too cartoonish. It's a bit too lumbering zombie. But I think they look great.
Oh, they're a fun idea, I think.
Yeah, they're kind of an obvious one.
It's a very small criticism.
It's done well, I think.
But I think that the director, Charles Palmer,
Jeffrey's son. Yeah.
Son of Jeffrey, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, little detail there. According to his Wikipedia.
Is he as jowly as his father?
Well, in the title sequence to As Time Goes By, where you see the picture of young Jeffrey Palmer and Judi Dench. I said Judy Finnegan. When you see the pictures of the two of them, it's Charles Palmer and Judi Dench's daughter.
Really?
The two of them. So,
wow.
Yeah. But I like a lot of the direction of the Davis era, but a lot of it's very TV, in a way that I think, TV globally and Doctor Who as well became a lot more cinematic from 2010 onwards.
Yeah.
I would say I like a lot of what Eros Lynn and Graham Harper and James Hawes. I like a lot of what they do, but it is in that sort of standard definition kind of late noughties TV kind of thing. But the direction here does look forward a bit. This does feel quite sort of expensive and quite well composed. But it's interesting that I think Palmer is one of the few directors from the Davis era to return in the Moffat era. So he did a couple of episodes in the last Capaldi run. He did Oxygen and the Roman Britain one as well, which
1 out of 2 ain't bad.
No, neither of which I particularly love.
Oxygen was all right, but yeah.
But yeah, no, it's interesting. I think the direction's really great on this.
When they, straight after the intro, and you see the flag going up on the flagpole, and they're playing "To Be a Pilgrim," which of course has the brilliant line "To follow the master."
I clocked that because I remember you and I finding that very funny at school whenever we.
Yes. But the fact that we're building towards the return of the Master in this season,
thanks to a chameleon arch as well.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So I thought that was terribly good, and the whole thing. I mean, cards on the table. I'm a big fan of the 1939 film Goodbye, Mr. Chips. Robert Donat, of course, famously won the Best Actor Oscar out of the hands of Clark Gable in Gone with the Wind.
Out of the hands of him?
He won it out of his hands.
Was it like the Moonlight fiasco this year then? They gave it to the wrong...
It was like that scene in Women in Love.
Oh, right.
So a lot of that... I mean, this is basically... I mean, in that wonderful way that Doctor Who does do this, it's a way to do that story, because Doctor Who can do anything, and it's really... it is... Anyone who has seen that film will see the parallels so very vividly. Less so with the ghastly 1969 Peter O'Toole remake.
What about the one with John Thaw?
No, isn't it?
Goodbye, Mr. Chip.
Oh, no, it's Martin Clunes.
Martin Clunes,
yes.
Yeah.
God.
You're thinking of Goodbye, Mr. Tom, which was about evacuees, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, there was a Martin Clunes one. Actually, the Martin Clunes one is better than the Peter O'Toole one, but we're digressing.
The finger is out again. Yeah.
But yeah, the sadness of conflict, that sense of preparing preparing for a generation to be lost, the futility of that, the nasty bitter taste it leaves, that you're sort of preparing them to take up that duty if necessary.
Yeah.
But at the same time, not denigrating that sense of duty.
No.
Or the sacrifice that those who were forced to go to the front made.
Yeah, it's not trivialising.
It's a bit of a knife edge thing to do.
It's a hard one to pull off.
Yeah, I mean, it's made a bit easier by the sort of narrative of the lions led by donkeys. So, the idea that, well, actually it was big people making wrong decisions, and actually everyone below was okay. So in that always gives you a way to frame that. But it doesn't really talk about the macro political situation. It talks about the personal and the sort of social and how it interacts here. You're sort of set up at the beginning, as I say, with the racism and the privilege of these private schoolboys. You're set up with them sort of a distaste for their class and their privilege, which then invites you to examine that privilege in yourself, because actually by the end of it...
And then the Doctor's privilege as well.
Well, yes, but by the end of it you're very, very sad that these posh boys are going to go off and be machine gunned. As, by the way, were a great many... Not very posh boys. Yeah. But you still have sympathy, and you question your prejudices. Now I think would be a good time to talk about some of the guest cast. I mean, Harry Lloyd as Baines.
Oh, he's phenomenal, isn't he?
Stunning.
Yeah, I mean, he chews
the two
scenery
as well,
like royally in some of the later ones. But in terms of like a sort of sideways smirk and alien look in his eye, he's great.
No, he's insane. And as I found out, an actual old Etonian, so he would have been able to channel some of that being an unbearable arse. But yeah, he's got that. I made a note. He's terrific at that malevolent, entitled gormlessness.
Yes,
at the beginning. It's sort of malevolent, entitled, and gormless at the same time. And when he sort of goes out to get the beer and all that sort of stuff, and his just haplessness as he encounters the alien craft. But then, because he does have to play two characters, and then when he switches and becomes the pantomime villain, but he's so alien, and it's almost like his neck isn't quite on right.
Yeah, it's like his head's at the funny angle.
Yeah, he plays that beautifully. Yeah, really impressive.
Terrific.
And what's the name of the Love Actually boy?
Oh, is it Jim Sangster?
Tom Sangster. Jim Sangster is a
horror writer.
Thomas Sangster, who was nearly Tintin, but wasn't in the end.
Oh, they went with Jamie Bell.
I think they started filming it with Thomas Sangster, or then they shifted the dates or something, and then Jamie Bell took over. But I mean, he's terrific. He looks so young as well, which is the thing when you see him in the trenches with the
oh, that's very
the
effective
tin
for
hat
me.
on.
Yeah,
it's incredibly effective because your initial thought is like, oh no, wait, he's too young to be playing this role. You know, that's a soldier, and then you go, oh no, that's the point they're making.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Like, he's amazing. Going to give a shout out to someone who I very rarely give a shout out to, Murray Gold. Really good in this. Really turns it. I don't know. There's just something very. It feels like he's working with what he's seeing on screen, as opposed to doing something entirely different. Which is, I think, sometimes where he can. You sometimes get the impression, especially later on, that he wrote the music to the script as opposed to what was actually shot.
To the extent that he uses, because the Doctor isn't fully his character, he uses snippets of the Doctor leitmotifs and doesn't finish them. So it's like da 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 da, but he doesn't then finish da 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 da. It's really clever the way he just uses the snippets of the leitmotif to say, well, this isn't actually the Doctor yet.
But he really dials it back to the bare minimum needed at times as well. So there are bits where, you know, after Baines goes back to the school after he's been possessed, it's really just some like low key drones and a bit of banging and crashing or something. There's no histrionics. The only thing I'll pull him up on is using Ring a Ring of Roses for the spooky little girl, because that's exactly what Kev McCulloch does in the in Remembrance of the Daleks.
Slightly less shrill, but
not much less shrill, oddly. But no,
the girl with the red balloon, by the way, is a brilliant sort of horror trope.
Well, that's lifted from It, isn't it?
The creepy girl with the red balloon. It felt like a very generic, even though I can't think of another example of it, but it felt like a very sort of generic horror thing.
I think that's lifted. I think that's in the novel as well. I seem to remember the red balloon being in the novel as well.
It's brilliant. Yeah. Very good, very good.
The novel is worth a read.
And the cliffhanger to Human Nature, you know, your friend or your lover. It's just a brilliant cliffhanger, you know.
That's a proper cliffhanger, isn't it? It's
exactly.
Yeah. So Jim, we've not sold you. Jury's still out.
Not really. I mean, I don't mind the story. I think all the sort of points on the production, the acting, it's a lot more enjoyable than I think when I first saw it 10 years back. I think I had some bigger issues with it. But no, the thing for me is that I'm just not really taken with that central idea of the Doctor becoming human. It's not something that particularly grabs me. So it feels a bit of an also-ran story as far as I'm concerned, I'm afraid.
You talked about somebody that we don't normally give some praise to. Freema Agyeman as Martha.
Yeah.
I think this is easily her best work.
No, she does good here.
And it actually makes me wonder whether it's just a case of her being given the right stuff. Because here, she's really great, you know, at the dance when she sits down with Jessica Hines to try to persuade her, look, this isn't the man you think it is. And that's she's very, very good, very engaging. She seems truly yoked to the Doctor and worried about him, and I think it's a very impressive performance. We talked earlier about the Doctor being somewhat revealed. The worst aspects of his character are revealed by just how nice John Smith is. But actually, the fly in the ointment there is that even with John Smith, his sense of duty, which isn't disrespected, he literally turns the boys into weapons. He literally turns those around him into weapons. He gives them machine gun classes.
And sanctions the boy being taken off and beaten.
Yeah.
Because he refused to take part.
So, you know, although I agree that he ends as a more sympathetic character, and particularly given that he has to make the ultimate sacrifice, there are those elements of the Doctor's character which shine through in him which are unpleasant. And I don't know, I find the whole thing just a beautiful, beautiful construction. For me, this is absolutely on a par with Spearhead from Space. It's in that very top drawer.
I think my favourite Second Doctor strip is actually the last one, which is the Night Walkers, and I suppose I like it because it does tie into the TV series. We see the Doctor starts off on a panel game show on TV, which somehow leads him to investigate a mystery in the countryside. Finds that, of course, it's walking scarecrows, and the scarecrows are in fact agents of the Time Lords who are there to complete the Doctor's sentence. And that strip was just one of the few that were set in this gap between the end of the War Games and Spearhead from Space.
Okay, and for our final story tonight, we wind the clock back 30 years precisely to 1977 for the Horror of Fang Rock, which sees...
Hold on. What, from the previous story that we covered? Or?
From the broadcast of the previous story.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, from 2007.
I thought you'd missed 10 years of your life.
You're checking my math there.
I was. You flunked math.
So, what happens in the Horror of Fang Rock? Well, during the Victorian era, the Fourth Doctor and Leela arrive at fog-bound Fang Rock, the eponymous isle, just as a stranded, jellyfish-like alien begins picking off lighthouse keepers, and soon the survivors of a shipwreck. As the bodies stack up, the Doctor learns too late that the creature can also change its shape. So, a couple of things to note about this. This is the Fourth Doctor and Leela. This is also, correct me if I'm wrong here, Jim, but the beginning of the Graham Williams era.
Correct.
This is the very first Graham Williams story, and it is written by Terence Dicks. It's a total blank. Doctor Who stories written by Terence Dicks.
Fully written by him.
Fully written by him. This.
State of Decay, which was what this story was going to be, The Witch Lords, but it got
much
postponed.
Later, yeah.
The Five Doctors.
5 Doctors, much later.
And he's got half the credit on War Games.
Right. So he's not actually written very much at this point,
but obviously
other than
a big deal during the Pertwee era.
Continually involved during the Pertwee era. I think he was also cranking out the novels by this point as well.
God, yeah.
But yeah, no, there's just a thing at the back of my mind. It's like there isn't actually that much written by Terence Dicks on screen other than stuff that you scripted. Anyway, this has a pretty good reputation, I seem to remember.
Yeah.
A perfectly decent one. Jim, what do you think of Horror of Fang Rock?
This does have a good reputation, but yeah, I think there are a handful of, in the classic series, really, the classic Doctor Who's which are always jostling for top spot, which would be things like Genesis of the Daleks, Caves of Androzani, Deadly Assassin, and this has a good rep, but is kind of overshadowed by those. Obviously, I'd seen this a few times before, but watching it for this podcast, I was just I think I started by thinking how good the sets were, then by how good the characters were, and the economy of how many characters were in it, and how little you needed to put into their dialogue to really get across who they were. And as it went along, I just thought, yeah, this isn't the best Doctor Who story ever, but it's pretty solid. And when I think of Doctor Who and why I like it, because often it can seem like we're cynical or critical about a lot of it, this is
I will not have that. Oh, no, wait.
Yeah, this is pretty much what I want Doctor Who or classic Doctor Who to be. It's kind of low stakes, maybe, or unambitious, but it just gets everything perfectly right. I really, really enjoyed watching this again.
John, had you seen this before?
I hadn't seen this before. And one of the things that I thought was really lovely to see was the return of Colin Douglas.
From Enemy of the World.
Yeah, we'd seen in Enemy of the World as the sort of security chief, Kent? No, Kent's not, though. I can't remember his name. Anyway, but the security chief in Enemy of the World. And he's wonderful here as a sort of very hammy, sort of, oh yeah, not round these parts, sort of.
Well, if
you want to use the word salty, don't you?
Salty sea dog.
Yeah.
He's a stubborn old mule, as the Doctor puts it.
Stubborn old mule, yeah.
If he and Sam Seeley could team up for a little.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't.
Oh,
who was
facts,
it?
big finish now.
John Abbott, who played Vince, the sort of credulous. They keep calling him young man, despite the fact that he's pretty much 40. He certainly looks at. Of course, the sea air would have battered his complexion, but yeah, I thought that this was really well cast. And I liked the characters. Jim mentioned the fact that with relatively little dialogue, combination of the good writing for them and the casting, economically you knew exactly what they were all doing and what they were there for, and their motivations. Yet I found this profoundly dull.
Wow.
Really profoundly dull. You know, I get that they're trying to do a sort of Hammer horror, and I agree with Jim, the sets are beautiful, really well done. I love the little details, like the rope banister down the side of the staircase. It's nicely shot, and I agree that they're trying to get something sort of spare and quite claustrophobic. There's really only the 3 rooms. There's the sort of boiler room, control room areas, and then the sort of the mess quarters, and the lamp room itself. So I get that it's meant to be claustrophobic, but for me, this just ended up being a sort of one of those typical Doctor Who procedurals where you're going from one place to the other, then back to the first place, then up to another place. And I didn't really see I don't really see why this has a good reputation. There are some quite nice little sort of sketch drawings of these characters, but there isn't really a theme. There isn't really these characters that get washed in, who have their own motivations, and the skullduggery and the attempted insider trading, and the politician who's only after. He sort of semi-redeems himself, but really he's only after saving his own skin, and therefore he gets his comeuppance. But for me, it's just a lot of people scratching their heads wondering what's going on, and then the Doctor sort of realising, oh yes, it's aliens, and these are the aliens, and this is what it's about, and improvising a weapon, and there's not much to it other than that. There is relatively little, Jim didn't chide, but he said he quite liked the smaller scale. I don't disagree with that. I don't mind that it's not about the Daleks versus the Cybermen or something like that. I don't need it to be high stakes in that sense. I quite like those intimate stories where, he needs to find the TARDIS or whatever. But for me, it's just that it dramatically doesn't hold together. It's only 4 episodes, thank God, because I was terribly, terribly bored by it. It just didn't seem to have a real energy to get it pulsing from one scene to the next. Leela, Louise Jameson, Leela, I think is far and away the most interesting character in this, and again I'm impressed with Louise Jameson's performance and the sort of her ability to convey a sense of steely naivety. I think she's very good, and it is, I must confess, it is nice to see her wearing some clothes and not just being some flesh on screen.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that allows you to really appreciate her performance. And I actually quite like her in the sailor garb, with the fishing jumper and
jumper and jeans.
Yeah,
it's
a great look, and
she's looking quite 1994, isn't she?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there are bits to like in it. I like the setup. I like the darkness, the sort of hammer horror. Even when the Doctor arrives and puts on the bowler hat, he's like the policeman who arrives at the house in a Hammer horror film. It's got that vibe to it, and I can see why people like it visually. But a bit like Talons of Weng-Chiang, which, again, the racism aside, is sort of respected as a well put together piece of television. For me, it just wasn't dramatically that interesting, and here again I just don't really see why anybody would particularly point to this and say it was great Doctor Who.
Matt,
I really like this. I thought it was really good. It's almost a sort of I sort of agree with Jim. I think it's a kind of platonic ideal of what I want sort of low budget, low key Doctor Who to be and do, really. I mean, it's it's not an original idea by any stretch of the imagination. The Thing from Another World had already done this, and that's sort of the major
arguably
depth.
It's like the Troughton Base Under Siege done well.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. I think it's and part of the reason why I asked what else Terence Dicks had actually written was for Doctor Who was just because he sort of has a reputation as Mr. Doctor Who in a way, and this feels like really, I think in a very good way, it's Doctor Who procedural. It's arrive at a location, there's a situation, people get picked off one by one. It's a very, very small, very tight location, and then the Doctor solves it. I think it's incredibly efficient. I think it does exactly what it needs to do. I think it does it with some flair, although none of it's showy. And I think it's incredibly tight and exciting. It did also occur to me that
I don't know how you can consider it exciting when Paddy Russell basically just points the camera at the rooms, and there's nothing in the cutting, the editing,
Just on that, there were famously quite a lot of production problems with this. It wasn't filmed in London. They went to Pebble Mill in Birmingham to do it. I can't remember why. I think it might have been industrial problems again. But also, this is beginning of the Graham Williams era. This is when Tom Baker really gets proprietorial and decides he's doing what he wants. And he was really at the end of his rope with Louise Jameson. Or rather, he'd been ignoring her for the previous few stories and wasn't happy with her being there still. And really didn't go on with Paddy Russell as well. If shots in this look a bit poorly put together, it's mainly Tom Baker's fault for not following what the blocking was.
But to me, that just adds to that. I like the claustrophobia of it. I like the fact that it's sort of 90 minutes in this space. It feels like that Inspector Calls kind of drawing room kind of territory. I don't know. It just gave me that vibe that I think. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything particularly exciting about how the visual presentation of it, but I think enough happens and enough new. I think the characters are all very nicely drawn. I think there's just enough going on to sort of sustain it.
I think for the Inspector, I don't disagree that's actually quite a good ambition. I like the
You could do a very good play of this, I think.
I like the parallel with an Inspector Calls. What I would, I think, have wanted, and I think a perhaps more competent script would have achieved this, would have been for the morass of interests and, when the businessman and the politician arrive and they've got their gambling debts and their insider trading and the blackmail and so on and so forth. I think a better script would have somehow engineered their foibles into the main plot such that they get their comeuppance somehow directly as a result of... I mean, they
need to deserve their fates in a way that...
Yeah.
Yes, I know what you mean.
Whereas it's just sort of, they're there, and because they're there, they die. But it's not... It doesn't feel like... It doesn't... To the extent, I suppose, that... I mean, the Lord dies because he stays to pick up the diamonds. But it doesn't feel quite so entwined. And the Doctor doesn't engage with that side of it at all. Whereas I think if the Doctor had been like a sort of Inspector Gould type...
Yes.
Maybe interrogating them on that, bringing it out of them, and then the route and sort of acting as divine retribution on that side of things before becoming the sci-fi villain. I don't know. I utterly don't understand. I'm not against a bit of claustrophobic Doctor Who. God only knows Midnight is my favourite episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
God only knows I'm not against that. Or a small scale, low stakes, for want of a better term, Doctor Who. But for me, this just doesn't connect. The direction is pretty much just... There are 3 walls in a room and the camera's in the 4th wall and just pointing. There's no decent cutting. They're just sort of going up and down stairs. The Doctor's confused for 3 of the 4 episodes and just sort of, I wonder what's going on. I just don't buy it. There's no real... The characters are well drawn, but they don't really interact with each other or bring out each other's strengths and weaknesses. I find it very unengaging.
I agree that now, I mean, and obviously let's not get into the business of rewriting this into what we would have liked it to have been. I did think it was kind of... Because I think Jim's comparison to the Troughton base under Siege setup is instructive. I think for what this does well. No, it's undoubtedly better than that. But the reasons are that it's not just a bunch of people who are fairly anonymous plonked in one place. I find this fairly thoughtfully put together. I like the fact, for example, that the overall setting in terms of the era and the location is that it's a point in it's an alien disrupting a point of history during a time of change. And so the idea that they're in a lighthouse that's moving over to electrification, you have the debate between the enthusiasm towards modernity that I can't remember his name, but the guy who's
Ben's
the other one,
he gets killed very quickly.
Yes, has for the electricity versus Ruben's suspicion of it, and so to me that feels like a really great combustible setup for a Doctor Who story, because it's a little less. I don't know. It just adds a few layers to what the characters are going through. Doesn't that create a rather Luddite
subtext? The person who's most engaged with the future and progress is bumped off first.
Well, no, not really, because that's
am I just reading too much into that?
No, I think that's not what the narrative is endorsing.
Well,
that's what the alien
because
is
he wants
doing.
Electricity. This is it. I mean, going back to your previous point about the characters not really engaging with each other, or if the play out between the politician and whatever, they felt like they deserved their fate more. I quite like the fact that people just get randomly bumped off in this. It does seem like whatever they're bitching about between each other, it doesn't really matter to this thing. It's just going to come and kill them regardless.
I was delighted that Adelaide got killed.
She gets killed.
She's incredibly annoying.
She is. And yeah, I think if you did that now, you get accused of sexism. But it's great that you've got Leela there as the counterpoint. She's probably
she rolls her eyes at them more than anybody else.
With her. Yeah, exactly. She's do shut up or whatever. When she's just shrieking.
I agree, that's quite effective.
But yeah, when she's killed, there's no build up to it. You just get a shot of Ruben with his hand on her head, and she's already getting sort of zapped. So I quite like the fact that there are all these concerns about reputation and fortunes. The old ways versus the modern ways, and this thing just plows in and kills them all off regardless. That's exactly it.
And to me, that's the sort of the Christie comparison, in that it takes a lot of people who have all got their own agendas chucks them in one place. They bicker over what those agendas are, but the alien just sides its way through it with complete indifference. I mean, that's sort of what I like about it.
Yeah, and I think it might be Rob Shearman, but I'd read one review of this which did make a good point, which is after you've had a 3-episode build-up of what is this thing killing them off, it's a little bit of a letdown when it starts just becoming a ranting warmonger at the end. It might have been nice. I mean, you've got a framed picture of the thing, the John Carpenter thing.
We have.
Assuming you're familiar with that. That is a fantastic film, I think. And one of the things I've only recently thought about why I like it so much is you never get to know the creature in it at all.
No.
It imitates humans, but there's no sense that it's got its own intelligence even. It could just be a fungus that imitates things. It may not have an actual plan or anything. And with this, it would have maybe been nice if they'd kept that total alienness of you never knowing what its personality was.
A bit like in Midnight, where it's a sort of unknowable malevolence.
We never get to it, yeah. I
So,
mean, also, I sort of agree with you in that I think that would have been dramatically more satisfying. That said,
once you've killed off all the characters, you need someone to talk to.
Well, no, but also I do just like as a sort of just as a
fanboy,
as a kind of abstraction of one of the things I like about Doctor Who is that it's almost like your platonic ideal of a Doctor Who monster, in that it's a green blob of slime with militaristic ambitions. You know, I like how sort of distilled it is in that regard. It's just a blob.
Yeah.
So the thing that struck me watching this, because I watched this a couple of months ago, and we were somewhat in the immediate aftermath of the Jodie Whittaker casting as the 13th Doctor. And there was a lot of debate going on, particularly due to the sort of debate between Peter Davison and Colin Baker, and Peter Davison's rather sort of, not wanting to relitigate that here, but perhaps slightly ill-chosen choice of terms, that it was a shame that the Doctor could no longer be a role model to boys. I think opened up a lot of conversation and ideas about the Doctor's masculinity, and I think a lot of the reasons why people have sort of said that Doctor Who is a more interesting sci-fi hero than, say, Captain Kirk, is that he's not a man's man. He doesn't kiss the girl, he doesn't beat people up, he finds the other way. Watching this, Tom Baker is all man in this. I mean, he's like literally the most alpha blokey bloke who uses his physical presence just to almost overwhelm and overpower a situation. His booming voice, he shouts people down. The threat of violence with which, if people don't like the way he's operating, there's that real, with Leela as his muscle, was it that Leela says, "Step aside or I'll cut out your heart," and the Doctor says, "You heard her." The Doctor is like super alpha male in this.
Yeah, and do you think most of that was in the scripting, or do you think it was in Tom Baker? Because like I
think
say, this is when he starts to get.
It is in the script, because there's even a bit where the sort of the posh characters discuss his. I can't remember the exact words, but they discuss his. He has a very. They basically suggest he's a bit uppity and has a very authoritative tone. But who is this Doctor? And so I think it is partly there. Obviously, a lot of it is in the performance, but it is there. There's enough breadcrumbs there.
Well, just his physical presence.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like
he barges in, and one of this famous things, of disagreements with Paddy Russell, was about how he came through doors.
Right,
he just ignored whatever she'd told him to do and was just barging through. And so probably put a lot more energy in. But yeah, he just seems. Again, I like the fact that there's the main conflict here is the Doctor trying to stop this alien killing everyone, and it kills everyone regardless. So the Doctor is just super impatient with everybody in this. But again, I think that a lot of that is just probably Tom Baker missing the fact he can't go off to Soho to get drunk that night. Really, is stuck in Birmingham instead. Yeah,
no, just like it's super manly in this, the Doctor.
I mean, I want to qualify my statement somewhat. I did find it dull, deathly dull, but it wasn't an entire yawn fest. I did think it was very much the lowest point of what I could consider a watchable Doctor Who procedural to be.
It just got over the line for you.
Barely.
And this is followed by The Invisible Enemy.
Right, so, a classic run.
But that's something we've not discussed. This is the first story of the Graham Williams era, but it feels, or would you agree, feels a bit Hinchcliffe. It's more like you'd think of...
it feels like it's definitely doing something a bit different to the sort of wacky space hijinks that we sort of associate with the Graham Williams era. And I think, I feel like I talked it down there. I think the Graham Williams era is very loose and unstructured, and to my mind, largely unsuccessful. I think it was you that made the point, maybe last year at some point, where you said that the influences on the Graham Williams era feel a lot more literary and literary sci-fi, but whereas the Hinchcliffe era, it's just like, right, we are pastiching horror movies and other TV at this point. That's what we're all about. So I don't know, the fact that it's got that kind of Agatha Christie thing going on, but maybe suggests it's a bit more literary, but you're right that it definitely feels, given that Williams comes in with a mandate to tone the series down in terms of its scares, this feels like it's just a very efficient attempt to basically bump off a lot of people in quite a horrific way.
Well, I love the fact that the mandate was to tone it down, and yet the first story is the horror of Fang Rock. I don't think there's any real evidence of toning it down. It is quite taut and creepy.
Quite unpleasant in places.
Very unpleasant, and there is a creeping inevitability to all of the characters apart from the Doctor and Leela dying.
But it's that thing of it's creepy, but it's not actually graphic, is it? In the way that some deadly assassin.
Again, it doesn't need to be, does
Genesis. It? Yeah, but it works. But it kind of goes.
I mean, I'm not squeamish about that kind of thing at all.
About dead fish.
No,
fish.
The floating rubber dead fish. But
yeah, it kind of goes back to what we said with Spearhead, when one of the most disturbing scenes is the doll factory with all these sort of baby dolls with no eyes and things.
Oh, yeah.
And you're not going to know.
And the machine's punching the hair into the.
Yeah, it's not graphic, but there's something just really unnerving.
Although that again, that is one that has the blood on the windscreen.
Yeah.
But this, I don't know. I don't really see why it's such a popular one, but I do think there are some good bits in it. I mean, for me, it's like a sort of curate's egg. I think the thing with the curate's egg is that it's meant to be good in parts, but if an egg is not good in some parts, you don't want to eat it at all.
Throw the whole egg away.
Yeah, and that's sort of where I am with it. But there were some good bits. I liked when they'd finally dispatched Reuben the Rutan. And Leela's really delighted and properly celebrating.
Yeah, she gloats,
and she says it's fitting to celebrate the death of an enemy, and the Doctor says, not in my opinion. But I don't have a time for a debate on ethics because we've got to deal with this ship that's coming down. That little, is just a tiny aside, but it gives you the sort of that moral compass you need that the Doctor, yes, okay, he's planning to kill all the people on this ship and do this, but he's not doing it with any great pleasure. He's doing it because it needs to be done. And that's quite a nice little moment to hit with one line, pretty much. So, and again, it's that balance between being the man of action who often leads to the death of others, but wanting to do so only in the right circumstances. It's the same kind of thing that's discussed in Human Nature and Family of Blood. So it's of a piece to an extent. So it's not completely without merit, and the little sketches of characters I find are really good, but it's less than the sum of its parts, in my view.
Having said that I really like it, I'm going to end you and maybe wrap up on a bit of a downer with this.
Cool.
Isn't this basically the story that Mark Gatiss is continually rewriting throughout his whole run? In that it's basically this idea of you find a historic period of a time of change, chuck an alien in, and then get the Doctor to be Doctorish.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that. I'm going to have to think about all of his stories, though.
We've got The Unquiet Dead does that. The Idiot's Lantern is about the birth of TV, does that. Victory of the Daleks.
Night Terrors,
World War II.
Really.
That one with Diana Rigg, where you've got the industrialisation of the North. I mean, it's that. This is the template for basically everything he wrote.
The thing is, I don't think he'd deny it, and I might be completely misremembering this, but I think around 99... before Doctor Who was announced it was coming back, I think they did ask a few writers what they do with it. So it was people like Paul Cornell and Mark Gatiss, and it may have been him who did say it shouldn't be epic, it should be like in a lighthouse and then the lights get turned off or something. I might be wrong, but I don't think it's a surprise to hear that Gatiss pretty much nails his colours to the mast. He really likes that gothic Victoriana thing, and he's done very well with it. Or sorry, he's done very well out of it.
Slightly different message.
Yeah.
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Midlands Today, which tonight comes to you for the very first time from our new broadcasting centre here at Pebble Mill, Birmingham.
That was the first time, more from Tom Coyne later, and this is the last time from Pebble Mill. Tonight on the programme, The Way We Were, we look back at the glory days of the mill.
Have you seen Star Wars yet?
No, I haven't.
No, it's been busy.
Have.
What did you reckon, John? No, Matt's not seen it, so we can't do spoilers.
We won't do a spoiler review, but I'll
say yay or nay.
Do a broad.
I thought it was good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I thought that this is completely unspoilery. I think Rian Johnson Ryan Johnson?
Ryan, I think.
Ryan Johnson.
Rihanna.
I think he, again...
More Fleetwood Mac.
Bloke, is it?
Yes.
Bloke?
Yeah.
I think he's
Of course, they're
done...
never going to let a woman direct Star Wars.
Of course not, no. I think he's done a good job in getting away from the visual vernacular of George Lucas, which...
That was what I liked about Rogue One, yes.
Yeah, and getting away from the sort of the side swipe screens and all that sort of stuff. I thought it was actually a lot... Even though it's very much the Empire Strikes Back segment, it's... I thought it was really funny. Funnier than Force Awakens,
There's a lot
actually.
of humour in it.
Yeah, there's a lot of good humour in it. My one major criticism, I suppose, would be that we were introduced in The Force Awakens to Rey and Finn, and their relationship seemed central, and yet for this, less so.
Once Lando comes in.
Once you got Lando in there, that's it.
He's just buckling the whole
Oh,
thing.
Christ, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Matt.
Sorry.
Yeah,
No, okay.
Lando's arrival is...
Maybe overestimating the extent to which I care.
Okay.
The number of fucks I give.
That's the best line in the film.
Yes. From the CGI Peter Cushing, yes.
Yeah.
Comes back with that one.
Well, on that bombshell.
Yes. But hey, if you want to talk about Star Wars or Doctor Who or
Doctor
any
Who,
nonsense...
or anything else,
maybe people could meet up with us.
They can. We're going to the pub again.
Both right now and...
Both right now after this recording. And again on Saturday the 3rd of February for our what we're hoping is going to be an annual tradition, the I'll Explain Later New Year listener drinks.
For that one, you're invited.
You are invited. Well, if anyone's drinking in Leytonstone this evening, maybe
anyone
we'll
in
run
drinking
into,
distance.
So we are going to be in the Blue Posts.
I've got the address, Matt.
The Blue Posts on the corner of Newman and East Castle Street.
It's
in
on
London.
Newman and... what was it?
Newman and East Castle.
Newman and East Castle.
John, give
on
us
the doity-doid floor.
Give the
where
people...
there's been a moida.
Give the
You
people
world-class
the
knucklehead.
postcodes.
Okay, so it's the Blue Posts, and there are several in London, so let's get this right. This is the Blue Posts, 81 Newman Street, Fitzrovia, London, W1T 3ET. That's W1T 3ET.
Lovely. And also direct any complaints you have about the show to that address as well.
Yeah. And it's a Sam Smith's. Will hopefully be upstairs. And being a Sam Smith's, it's nice and cheap.
Yes.
At least, well, the draft beer is cheap. The bottles can be ruinously expensive.
Let's not relitigate that. So we'll be upstairs on Saturday the 3rd of February from 2 p.m?
Yeah.
2 p.m?
Yeah.
2 p.m. good for you guys? Great.
I'll be there from noon, but no. No, to be clear, 2 p.m.
Turn up at noon to watch John eat some basket scampi.
No,
the invisible enemies.
To be clear,
yes.
we're 2 p.m.
Right.
2 p.m.
We very much hope to see you
We did
there.
a lot of planning ahead of this.
If you
We've
can't
booked an area. We haven't booked an area.
If you can't make it, we hope you'll join us again in February, where we'll be reviewing 3 more Doctor Who stories.
Shall I
Yes,
tell you
what are we
they are?
reviewing next month?
We're going to do the Invasion.
Mm-hmm. Ooh.
Tooth and Claw or Tooth and Claw. Tooth
Right.
and Claw.
Nice.
Yeah.
And Destiny of the Daleks.
Okay. So maybe...
You may have noticed that means another David Tennant and Tom Baker story, but this is just how things have...
It's how the cookie crumbles.
And the Invasion's 8 episodes, right?
Yep, so I've started watching now.
So I'm going to have an even earlier start.
Early start for John there. You may have noticed that our mailbag has run pretty dry, so do send us your thoughts on those stories. It would be lovely to chip in with a bit of your feedback on those next month. And if you do want to get in touch, you can email us to hello@I'llExplainLater.com. You can tweet us at @ExplainLaterPod. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/I'llExplainLater. And please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts.
Why not leave us a review?
Why not leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? And even better, make it a good one.
Yeah. I mean, that would
say nice things about us.
Well, we'd prefer that to a bad one.
Yes. I mean, if you have a 1-star review of this podcast, then please send it to the Blue Post, the address we gave earlier.
Yeah, we gave earlier.
Any other business, gents?
Nope.
All right. Well, we'll either see you at the Listener Drinks on the 3rd of February or back here on the 15th of February for more Doctor Who related fun.
Fear.
See ya.
That was an air horn.
Okay, bye-bye.
Ciao. And a strange glowing object falls from the... fuck off.
Not like you haven't heard it enough already.
I've probably heard it too many times.